Can't see us. I was just grooving with that then, Amy. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to episode 136 of Overdose and Chill. Broadcasting live on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. So wherever you are joining us, if you post any questions in the comments on those platforms, it magically makes its way into us. And we've got Raven in the background who will be pushing all those questions up to see us. Delighted to have on today's episode Amy Zobec from Stripe with a stellar career across all things SaaS, and really excited to rip into what you're up to now at Stripe. So Amy, give us a little bit of a hello and an introduction to yourself.
Yeah, hi Todd, and thank you for having me on the show today. My name is Amy Zobec, and I currently lead the digital natives business at Stripe for Australia and New Zealand. I'm coming up to just 6 months at Stripe, and it's been a very exciting and wonderful journey over the past 6 months. Prior to that, I was at Shopify. Todd, you know Shopify very, very well. I was there for 4 years. And prior to that, I was at LinkedIn, and before that, SaaS. So my entire career has been in sales roles and lead roles across those organizations, and helping customers in terms of their digital transformation and journeys with technology.
So Amy, you've got such a cool job title. Explain to us, what does digital natives mean as a division at Stripe?
Yeah. So digital native businesses are those that rely on the internet to do business. So they're innovative businesses. They're those that are, very forward leaning in terms of thinking about technology and innovation and emerging technologies. And so we work with a number of businesses, the likes of, Canva, Me and You, the iconic Luxury Escape. So a number of businesses that were either born on the internet or rely heavily on the internet to get their job done.
But not just pure plays, right?
Not just pure plays, no. So these could be businesses that started on the internet and have since opened up retail footprints, as an example. Or they could be businesses that have kind of a hybrid model, but are heavily dependent and reliant on the internet.
So, Amy, if I looked at your CV, I can see on there, well, not your CV, your LinkedIn, let's be honest. You've kind of positioned your career with people that are going through, or organizations that are going through that kind of maybe the second round of rapid adoption, right? And going through those growth phases, LinkedIn and then Shopify. So what is it about Stripe and payments that attracted your attention to want to invest your career there as well?
So when I was at Shopify, having worked with merchants and users around Shopify Payments, which is Shopify's payment solution, what I was really interested in was looking at that entire user journey when a customer or consumer was going to a merchant's website, that kind of whole funnel or journey from landing on the site all the way through to making that purchase. And I think what a lot of businesses do is they really do focus on the top of that funnel or the start of that journey. So what customers, what behaviors they're doing on that website, where they're clicking, what they're adding to cart. And even when they are coming through to that kind of final step of the checkout, but not really what happens at that point when they're actually making that payment, that very final and last step. And I would argue the most critical step is actually capturing the money from that consumer. And that's what really got me interested in thinking about that payment landscape, how important that piece of the journey is for
Mhm.
businesses, and how I could make an impact leveraging the knowledge that I had from Shopify, and then bringing that into the payments world, which traditionally sits with finance and payments professionals, but putting a marketing or a business lens on top of that to start to understand that full funnel, and then how payments is that kind of final step, and how it can be kind of brought together in an entire customer journey.
So payments never used to be sexy, right? Payments used to be this, God, I guess I'll hook up my bank and it is what it is and I take what's given. And I feel like Stripe, along with, obviously several other fintechs that have been putting in some bit of jazz and special sauce in there, but it feels like Stripe's bringing sexy back to payments.
Well, I think so. I probably at the start of my career when I was working at somewhere like LinkedIn, I probably wouldn't have imagined myself
Mm,
working, at a fintech company, and around payments. But like I said, payments is, and that's just one part of it. Obviously, at Stripe, Stripe is that entire financial infrastructure. So looking at more than just payments, which we can kind of go into later. But really around that, as I mentioned, that entire customer journey, and customers really, or consumers really, driving the response from merchants and
mhm.
businesses to then adapt and change and reflect what consumers want and what they expect when it comes to making payments. Consumers are telling us that they want to make a payment the same way that they jump out of an Uber. And so how
Right.
do businesses constantly adapt and change and simplify their payment processes, as well as making sure that they're personalized, and they're suiting those customer preferences as well. So I think where it's a really exciting moment in terms of where Stripe is, and kind of how customers and merchants are responding to the demands of the consumers.
Yeah, so if I think about Stripe, and I think my opinion or perspective of the brand has changed over the last kind of couple of years, which is, you mentioned there that it's an infrastructure as much as it is a brand and a product and a service, right? And if I think back, 3-4 years ago, I viewed Stripe very much as a infrastructure that you hooked into, but it feels like you're coming up the food chain now, and you're getting much closer to the consumer and more of a product view than a service view. Is that fair?
Look, I think where Stripe kind of started around payments, it's really evolved into, and like I said, we can talk about this in more detail. But really, when we think about how businesses are trying to change, adopt, kind of grow new revenue streams, especially off the back of the pandemic and now with the current macroeconomic conditions, businesses are really thinking about ways in which they can create these kind of durable, repeatable revenue
Hmm.
streams within their businesses. So where it was just payments and really that kind of, we're in a kind of e-commerce context now, but thinking about those consumers shopping on site and then checking out using a payment gateway, it is really now more than that. So thinking about businesses, the way that they are looking to diversify, and how Stripe as an infrastructure platform is really supporting, and also really helping businesses to make those decisions around where they should go next to grow that revenue. So if you think about a business and kind of everything they do around that kind of whole financial technology piece, whether it comes to payments, whether it comes to billing and invoicing, whether it's internal reconciliation, all of those kind of aspects that a finance team needs to be across in day-to-day management of a business. Stripe is kind of in all of those areas.
And I think that's a really interesting narrative of where we're talking about payments as a nebulous for growth rather than payments just at the back end of a stream of all of the CX that's gone on kind of before there, right? And I guess historically, a lot of the conversations you or I would have been dragged into is all just about what's my commission rate on that particular payment. But I guess what you're leaning towards here is that payments is the critical part. Whilst it feels like one of the last parts of the customer experience, it's a critical part in there. And my assumption there is that you've got some whizzy data out there that shows that, hey, let's not focus too much on the extra decimal point of percentages that we're playing with here. Let's focus on the retention rate, the conversion rate, and the whole unifying experience, and aligning people across different channels with a same unified payment structure. Is that where the company's leading towards now, you feel?
Yeah, and I think we're definitely, we're there in terms of having those conversations with our customers. So definitely that conversion funnel is one piece. As I mentioned before, thinking about those customer preferences. I mean, we know that if a customer actually goes ahead, places an item in a checkout, and goes to checkout, and their preferred payment method isn't available, we know 85% of the time they will actually abandon
Wow.
that checkout. That's just kind of one. You
Mm-hmm.
mentioned data, so we know that that's a critical part in terms of ensuring that the consumer has their preferred payment option available to them. But then on that kind of proactive piece around helping businesses grow, it goes back to not just working with finance teams, but working with marketing, working with business leaders, working with IT. From an IT perspective, it's really around simplifying that tech stack. So we work with a lot of merchants that will have, outdated, bloated infrastructure internally. And so how can we look to consolidate and bring a lot of that over to Stripe? You've then got one point of view, one kind of data source around all of your financial information, and then you're reducing that tech debt in terms of in-house or kind of external resources as well. And then on the kind of growth side, it's then really working with users. Like we're working with a user right now who is looking at building a loyalty program. And so we are really kind of
Mm-hmm.
starting that journey with them around how Stripe can facilitate and support that project, and really help to add an additional revenue stream to that business as they go through these really uncertain times where predictability just isn't there from a revenue perspective. And so how can they engage with their customer base in a new way, get access to new customer data and customer data sources that they haven't had before,
Mm-hmm.
and then also provide additional value to their customers through these kind of value-added loyalty programs.
I'm really keen to talk to you about this kind of evolution of commerce and these different models that you're seeing. But I've got one question that's kind of always in the back of my head, and it's a bit weird and a bit random. But does Stripe employ psychologists? Do you have people in the business that are looking at this not from a qualitative data perspective or from a design perspective, but genuinely from a consumer psychology point of view?
Look, I don't know the answer to that question.
I just think it'd be amazing if there was, like, chief psychology officer, it's
Yeah, yeah. Look, we do a lot of, I know you mentioned, qualitative data and quantitative, but we do a lot of research, not only with, internally looking at our data, but also kind of external surveys with customers. We recently put out a survey with about 250 Australian business leaders around this, trying to get
Mhm,
an understanding of kind of where their head is at in terms of coming out of the pandemic, and then what they're thinking about for their businesses around kind of reducing costs, but also thinking about revenue growth as well. And then we have a lot of, with a lot of our tools and those kind of value added tools that we do have, which are things like, Radar, which is our fraud prevention tool.
okay,
We do have a lot of kind of machine learning capabilities as well that are looking at, consumer behavior, as well as behavior of other technologies, to then kind of build
mhm.
in and train that machine learning model to help make our products even more valuable for customers in terms of either, blocking fraudulent orders, letting orders through that aren't fraudulent, kind of retrying on orders that maybe were declined for whatever reason. And so really adding value and return on investment for customers that are investing in Stripe.
Got you. Got you. So you started to mention there a little bit about loyalty programs.
Mm.
I'm also really keen to understand how Stripe is seeing the subscription economy as well. Is that something which is Now, there was a massive rise of subscription economy that happened through COVID, right? Of people saying, not just subscriptions to service, but to product, so on and so forth. I know Stripe's got some very cool products around that, but at a macro level, do you see that that's here to stay?
What we're seeing is that businesses that, and when I worked at Shopify, we did have a lot of customers that were looking at loyalty programs. I think perhaps the kind of traditional way that loyalty programs were set up, you kind of got that spend and earn capability. We're finding that those types of, with the customers that we work with, and we don't, just work with kind of e-com or retailers, not so much that type of loyalty program, but more looking at kind of subscriptions-based services around kind of value adds. So, if we have a loyal customer base that are thinking about a subscription service where they'll pay a monthly fee for that subscription and then get access to, free shipping on items, for all orders, and ongoing discount on all of those orders with kind of like a tier base after that. So from what we're seeing, it's slightly shifted in some of the kind of mechanics around what a loyalty program looks like. But in terms of loyalty programs as a whole, we're seeing that businesses that haven't traditionally had one are now invested and looking at those as a new revenue stream and a new way to, have data and information on their customers that they may not have had, based on these new kind of spending habits, as customers, go back into the shops, as well as some new competitors online that have come into the market from overseas. And so, local businesses in Australia are thinking about how they can respond to that, and react with these types of programs.
Do you think there's a place where loyalty goes too far, where there's just too many of these programs and it almost becomes an expected default rather than it being special to that consumer?
Look, I potentially, I mean, I almost think with the majority of retailers that have the kind of omni-channel, it is almost, table stakes at this stage around a loyalty program. And so I think what are a lot of the businesses that we're working with that again are kind of online first businesses, not always e-com, they could be, SaaS or other platforms, are really looking at that, the way that they can differentiate themselves. So again, working with one of our customers, and we were recently talking just this week actually around, back in the day, what they were offering in terms of their incentives and in terms of their kind of value adds and unique value proposition today is table stakes. So while they're at the forefront then, they're no longer anymore. And so what they're offering in terms of those differentiation is just expected by the consumer. And so, trying to keep on top of all of those trends and innovation, trying to keep on top of consumer demands and always being in front, it actually can be quite challenging for merchants to do that. And so, we work with a lot of them. We're bringing insights that we have from that kind of helicopter view across a lot of other retailers or other industries to say, we've worked with this customer here. Let's start to think about how we can kind of innovate and bring these technologies into your business.
Yeah, it feels like a bit of a catch-22 to me, that whole space where we have a lot of merchants that are talking about, well, shouldn't I just do Flybys or Airpoints or, one of these, macro places? But then your CX brain switches in and says, well, I'm just giving my data away. And who now owns my customer, right? I feel that there's going to be, over the next couple of years, a rise of, almost a re-rise of collaboration. If you think back sort of like 4, 5, 6 years ago, collabs were all the rage, right? Everyone was doing collabs. And it seems they've slightly started to disappear and everyone's kind of gone a little bit more insular and single brand. But they don't want to give away their whole program to everybody. So it wouldn't surprise me if you start seeing collectives of products where, what you buy for your husband or you buy for the wife, you buy for the supermarket, and there's that complementing suite of where they gather around and have some unification of customer data. But it all gets a bit sticky and all gets a bit tricky.
Yeah.
I digress, Amy.
Yeah. And look, a lot of our users are also looking at that at the moment from an omni-channel perspective. I mean, and you would know, Todd, working with a lot of retailers that, even not even so much from a collab perspective, but just individual brands are still trying to kind of pull those pieces together in terms of all of their own customer data, in terms of what's going on in store and what's happening in line and online. And so we're still working with a lot of users around what that looks like in terms of pulling all of those pieces together and consolidating all of the customer data that they have, and even working with their internal kind of data warehouse and starting to pull together the data that lives in Stripe, the data that they have in their data warehouse, so they can kind of paint that entire picture of a customer internally as well. So I think a lot of businesses are going through that process at the moment as well.
Yeah, and with the current market conditions, I think there's a lot of appetite, but there's a lot of resistance on big capex spend as well, right?
Mhm.
So whilst there's a desire to go and collect this level of data, and it's so more imminently available now, obviously with our restrictions that are in there, it's a very interesting time where technology has moved forward at a speed faster than what the economy has, if you know what I mean.
Mhm.
So the opportunities of product out there are almost in excess of the capex opportunity. So we're seeing a lot of these merchants having God, I've got 5 different places I could drop my cash. Do I
Mhm.
split it 5 ways and do a little bit of each, or do I focus on one of these and try
Yeah.
to kill it? So it's interesting times for sure. But for me, what that says is that 18 months, 2 years ahead, as we come out of these cycles, there's going to be that next big wave
Mhm.
of adoption that comes through there. Now, hey,
Yeah.
look, you touched on a little bit of machine learning there. So obviously, topic du jour is obviously everything AI. What does that mean in a payments environment, and specifically to Stripe? Where do you see, not necessarily for the product itself, but where do you see AI driving the future of that kind of SaaS payments product landscape?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting concept. And as I mentioned, we have kind of elements of that already in play with some of our products, as I mentioned, Radar being one of them. And I think with payments, it is constantly evolving and changing. There are so many components of payments. We're just one part of it. You've got the issuers, you've got the banks, you've got government legislation. It is constantly evolving and changing. And that's just in Australia. You've obviously got then, from a global perspective, each individual country so nuanced as it comes to their, own kind of geographical capabilities as well. And so we are constantly looking at ways in which we can kind of scale and adapt all of that technical nuance into our product, not just for, as I mentioned, like fraud protection being one, which is
Hmm.
extremely important when it
Yeah.
comes to making payments online. But then all other elements of the Stripe products as well across the entire suite of the board. So I think staying on top of the evolving landscape is extremely important, and I can only see AI becoming kind of critical and central to that moving forward to ensure that we are kind of staying on top of that evolving landscape.
Yeah, and I'm sure that opens up some other security stuff, and I'm not sure whether it's truly AI, but when you start thinking about, facial recognitions for payments, and you see some of the stuff, like I was seeing something online over in Asia where you can literally just walk up to the tube or the train and walk on, and it debits your card based on facial recognition and things like that, right? So it's almost starting to change how do we interface with payments, and almost the concept of a credit card is it's a ticket that never comes out of your wallet now. Like I
Mhm.
pay everything on my phone using Apple Pay, right?
Yeah.
I never tap and go with a credit card anymore. So it's all going to change.
Yeah.
Um, we did have a question that was coming in here, which is, how do you see that difference between, it goes back to what I was just saying, the balance between convenience versus security, right? So
Mhm.
obviously you're trying to reduce all the friction of that payment going through, but clearly that increases your likelihood of fraud, because it makes it easier, right? So
Mm.
how do you find that balance with Stripe?
Yeah, look, it is constantly evolving, and we work with our users on this on a daily basis. Each set of circumstances surrounding a customer and their, what they're selling, where they're selling it, lends itself to, different kind of risk profiles with the customers that we work with. But I would say that it is a constant balance, and so really central to that is data. So we will look at our users' data, in conjunction with them, and really understand, of the orders that we, from a like a radar, which is our kind of fraud protection, of those that we, blocked, of those, how many of those were fraudulent or not, and then on the reverse, how many of those orders that we let through could have been fraudulent or had like a high risk profile. And it's constantly looking at that balance. And with those machine learning capabilities, they're really at a point now where those kind of on either side, so those kind of false positives that come through, versus those blocked orders, is at a point where it's really allowing the technology essentially to do the job, and then kind of layer on those internal expertise, whether there is like an internal fraud team that we will work with at a customer, depending on how big their team is, or it could be their payments team, and we can constantly kind of refine the logic or the rules within that, again based on the risk profile of the customer, or the product that they're selling, or the location that they're selling in.
It's intriguing, and I guess that there is always someone looking for a new angle to defraud you or scam you through every
Yeah.
kind of conversation. Oh gosh, what's this one? A question for me. In your experience, Todd, what are some of the biggest misconceptions businesses have about using solutions and platforms like Stripe? I thought I was the interviewer. How am I getting asked questions here? Okay, completely unprepared. So I would say that it goes back to what I was saying earlier, which was historically people have viewed that the payments experience is your bank, right? And we have all used some terrible checkouts where it sends you to third-party screens, and when you're having to whip out little devices and run in your extra 2FA codes. And I think for a lot of consumers, it was a core expectation that you just used your bank's version of a checkout. That obviously evolved into specific gateways that were very localized. And I don't think people really understand that Stripe can be an accelerator to your global business, right? So it starts to bring down those boundaries of how do I ship internationally, so on and so forth. I think the other part to that is that, what we talked about earlier is that it's the perception that payments aren't sexy, and that payments is just this guaranteed thing that's going to happen as soon as you've made it to cart, right? And we all who work in commerce focus on conversion rates, but I think now I see my team more and more looking at that in more granular levels of add to cart rates, steps through checkout rates, and really understanding not just there was an abandon, but where that specific abandon was happening. And I completely agree with Amy that a lot of that can come down to it's just too hard, right? And I give you an exact case in point. I was on a website the other day, and I wanted to check the shipping price for a pair of sneakers, and I accidentally bought them. And I literally accidentally bought them because I was on the Apple Pay. I double clicked on my phone, and it was like, oh, you just bought these. And yeah, it was $20 that you paid for shipping. And it was like, okay, maybe we've taken frictionless a little bit too far here, but hella clever to get me to ensure that transaction happened. And I did not input a single piece of information. And, I know that Stripe was the technology that's sitting behind that website that is enabling, that customer record, the data that's being captured, and processing that payment with my safe cards. So I think it's that concept, rounding it out, it's that concept of the fact that payments does ease things. And then also the product set that comes with Stripe is so much more than just a payment gateway. The ability to fire up your subscriptions through there, your fraud prevention that comes out of the box, and we're not having to go and bottle together 3 or 4 different products to get to a single integrated solution. Can I get a job at sales at Stripe, Amy? Was that okay?
You did
All
well.
right, good. Okay, this one's for you from Sam over in Sydney. Talk us through the most interesting payments implementations you've seen. There must be something funky out there that's using IoT devices or transactions. Maybe it's a bit of crypto. I don't know. What are you
Yeah.
seeing?
I would say, look, there's a bunch of emerging kind of technologies that Stripe is a part of, and what's really interesting that we just have recently launched is tap to pay, which I think is we're just starting to work with a lot of customers around this. Not at the implementation phase just yet. I'll have a think over the last 6 months what I've seen from an implementation perspective, but thinking about how that technology can be used to solve a lot of problems that customers in store have. So, as an example, thinking about queue busting in stores. So when you do
Okay.
have a in-person sale, and you've only got so many retail assistants, how can we actually bring that payment to that customer as they're shopping in
Hmm.
store, versus them queuing, and paying at checkout, or potentially abandoning if they're in a rush, and there is a queue and they need to jump out of the store. We're really seeing some interesting pieces around, QR ordering and menu ordering as well.
Hmm. Super
So,
cool.
working with a lot of, and I wasn't part of that implementation over the past 6 months, but we work with customers like me and you and Mr. Yum, who are really changing the way that diners going out and eating in these hospitality venues, how they're kind of still bringing in that kind of service element with the hospitality staff, but are bringing that layer of convenience and personalization as well to
Mm.
orders. So again, saving time, but on an app, remembering, Todd, that you love to drink a Negroni, then being able to open that app and have your favorite order there, with your kind of favorite meal as well. So really bringing in that personalization element to that dining experience as well. So I would say they're probably some of the key, like, really interesting things I think that we're doing, which as a consumer changes the way that you interact in these either retail or hospitality settings.
And I think you're touching on there is that, you know, the question I get asked most whenever I'm going and talking at a conference is, what's the future of commerce, right? And
Mm.
no one knows the answer to that. But I think what it always boils down to is always look at where the transaction's happening, right? So it's a follow the money view of the world, right? So if you look at the product evolution, everyone wants to be part of the transaction.
Mhm.
Even if you look at the majority of SaaS products now, everyone's trying to get a little slice of the transaction rather than having a base service fee in the background,
Mhm.
right? Because
Mhm.
you want to benefit from the growth that's happening through platforms. So, we've seen that evolve. What do you say? We've seen it in Instagram, where we've seen that become transactional. Facebook's, has flitted around with different levels of transactability.
Mhm.
Google's had a play, right, with their shopping. In fact, I'm not sure. Have you seen the new version of Google with their GPT kit baked in?
I think recently, yeah, I saw a
Yeah,
bit.
Jason, who runs our search, kind of got a backdoor pass to see how this was
Ah,
happening,
oh,
and
no.
that is going to fundamentally change e-commerce. Like,
Mm,
literally, because if we imagine that 70% of all e-commerce traffic is from organic searches on the
mm,
internet, and
mm.
now you've taken up the entire first page of Google is going to be taken up by a new, different product.
Yeah.
When you were focusing on being the first in organic search, you now need to be the first in a AI GPT search, right?
Mhm,
And the
mhm.
way that they've architected that product, when you start to see it, it can now be 2 to 3 clicks in a Google screen before you get to the merchant's website, right? And it looks very, very primed that transactions could happen within a Google environment,
Mm,
where we then start to have the conversation of, do we all need websites anymore? Right? Is that what it means? Is the whole
mm.
concept of e-commerce now no longer about websites, but about digital engagements
Yeah,
with consumers?
yeah,
Are you
yeah.
seeing any kind of weirdness and oddities of other places that people are transacting that it wouldn't be normal?
Uh, no, I mean, it kind of just goes back to what we were just talking about around thinking about, you know, paying kind of like single click checkouts. As you just mentioned, you bought your those sneakers via Apple Pay. So, Stripe has Link, which is our, one-click checkout.
Yep.
And so, again, consumers are just expecting that to reduce in terms of those friction points for making that payment. We are seeing, obviously, pay to kind of real-time payments. That's also going to shift how we see payments today in terms of those kind of instantaneous payments as well. But yeah, and then those two examples that I just mentioned there around kind of hospitality and then in-person retail, which also then can extend to things like, like tradespeople visiting you in your home. And rather than, bringing through a device in which they take your payment or kind of invoicing you afterwards when they get home, they've got their Apple device or their Android device and they're able to take that payment from you then and
I
there
I
using.
literally got hit with that with a house mover, right?
Yeah.
Of where he said, right, everything's done. And then he
Yeah.
suddenly came at me with the phone to pay. And it's like, shit, I thought I had 28 days on an invoice. Like, no, bro,
No payment
cough,
terms anymore. It's instantaneous. Your
cough up
phone
now.
on their phone, and you've made that payment as well. So from a like a small business perspective, you are a tradesperson. I mean, that can be extended to anything. Market stalls, pop-up shops. That ability then to take those payments instantaneously is going to change the way that we do commerce, not just from a retail perspective, but extending out to all aspects of life.
Yeah, and it's going to happen more and more. Yesterday, I had my number plate recognition that then automatically charged me for parking and lifted the gate. So
Yeah.
it stands there 2 seconds and you're out. And it's
Yeah.
like, hey, I was still dirty that it was $10 to park for half an hour in the city, but at least I was in and out and didn't have to do the giraffe climbing out of the car window and
Yeah.
trying to hit the thing.
Yeah.
So it's happening more and more.
Yeah.
Very cool. So I guess my last question for you is, where do you see the future happening here? What should merchants be looking out for? And what are those great opportunities that you see most merchants aren't grabbing? Do you know what I mean? When it comes to this payments infrastructure, what are those kind of 2 or 3 things that they should be grabbing hold of and then looking out for?
Yeah. So I think kind of going back to what I was saying, really seeing payments as an integral part of that entire customer
Hmm.
journey. Like we know that like over 95% of e-commerce websites have around 5 or more very basic checkout errors, which are hurting their conversion. And these could be really, really kind of small, like paper carts, but make up to really impact that conversion funnel. So really looking at it not just from a payments and finance perspective, but really integrating that payments conversation in with their, marketing teams, e-com teams, business leaders, IT, to really get an understanding of how that plays an integral part into that journey. Also then just thinking about, looking at the business today and then looking at what that looks like in the future. When we talk to CFOs, around half of them are looking at the moment, their number one priority is reducing cost within their
Yep.
business. And the other half are thinking about how they can grow their business to increase profit. And so really thinking about new ways in which that business can evolve through those new revenue streams, and really making sure that when they do so, they're doing so in a way that their tech stack doesn't become inflated and bloated. We saw through COVID that a lot of customers were pivoting quite quickly and kind of adding on different pieces of tech to kind of pull together a solution to adapt and thrive throughout the pandemic. But now we're really at a point of where they can now consolidate that all of those pieces of tech to really kind of get that central view of the customer, and then also reduce the tech debt as well.
So Amy, that's a really key point, right? Which is that we tend to see e-commerce managers, CMO, are effervescent, exuberant, entrepreneurial people, right?
Mm.
And they want speed, they want progress, they want change. Um, and we see them fighting, and apologies to any CFOs on the call, but we tend to see them fighting CFOs that tend to be more insular in personality, and they're looking at the micro number on the spreadsheet of how do I change that from 1.8 to a 1.7% cost, right? So how do you broach that conversation, right? Because it's a tough conversation to have, saying, hey, yeah, stop looking at that number, look at this number over here. And if we grow that, everyone's happy. But you can get a blanket no, because I can change that and guarantee an impact.
Yeah, yeah. I
You know
think
what I'm
it
asking? I'm not
Oh, yeah.
verbalizing it well.
Yeah, no. It's, thankfully with Stripe, we have the ability to a lot of the data around obviously cost is available, but then
Mhm,
also like return on investment through a lot of these kind of additional, services, like I mentioned, things like, radar, adaptive acceptance, card account updater, these add-on tools that do provide immense value for businesses, in the millions of dollars, in terms of providing return on investment. So helping from a finance and products perspective to paint that entire picture. And then I think it's really around, as a sales team, having really strong engagement with the customer, kind of at that C level, for those business leaders that are not just focused on kind of their individual areas of concern, but have that kind of overarching goal of the business, which is around, like I said, reducing cost, increasing revenues, and then how we can kind of pull all of those KPIs and strategic goals together, and then kind of backing that up with the data that's provided. Look, it's not easy, and most, either with existing customers or prospective customers, kind of trying to build out that stakeholder or buying committee can be challenging. But I think when you do have alignment at that level, you're able to then paint that entire, as we mentioned, that entire picture, around added value and revenue and those kind of value levers that something like a
mhm.
payment platform can provide, which isn't just about those basis point savings, on a payment gateway.
So essentially, tell me if I'm selling you wrong here, but a CMO can come and talk to Stripe, and you can work with them to model out what that financial model looks like, essentially to write a business case rather than just running it on an Excel of different numbers.
Correct. Yeah, we have the ability to kind of build out, ROI,
Yeah.
calculators and modeling, looking at a bunch of different things, around average order value, around number of customers, customer lifetime value. We can really kind of look at their, entire business, including their growth from a future marketing perspective, like around, kind of acquisition and the funnel, and then kind of help to look at that as an entire kind of business model.
Super interesting.
Mm.
So I guess my last thing is then when people want to do this with you, how do they find Amy?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, at Amy Zobec. And then we also have, via our website, the ability to contact us and speak to our sales development team. We also have just recently launched a kind of dedicated enterprise section on our website, so designed specifically for large customers as well. So there's a bunch of
Okay.
resources there around some case studies and users that we've done some really interesting and fascinating work with, like, Ford as an example. We've done some great stuff there as well. And then, yeah, my entire team would be available to talk to anyone that's, interested in exploring further.
And if I recall correctly, you've got some roadshows coming up soon across APAC, haven't you?
Yeah, great plug there, Todd. So we've got Stripe Tour,
Stripe tour.
which is August 8th in Sydney. We've got a fantastic lineup of speakers, and there's more being added every day. But at the moment, we've got Atlassian, me and you, who I've mentioned a few
Mhm.
times today. And we're going to have some breakout sessions, which are going to be designed around a lot of the topics that I've spoken about today. But you can kind of look at that agenda and help to kind of decide what's going to be relevant for you, in your role and kind of business stage and where you're at, and then come and attend there. So yeah, highly recommend registering for Stripe Tour August 8th in Sydney.
Awesome sauce. That was incredible, Amy. Thank you so much for your time. And I hope you have a fantastic weekend. And I look forward to seeing you at the Stripe Tour.
Great. Thank you, Todd. Thanks for having me, and have a great weekend.
Joyce, thank you.